Good evening. Welcome to the March 15th edition of the Downers Grove Village Council meeting. I'm glad you're here with us tonight. We also have some special guests, the Hillcrest Brownie Troop 56004, who is going to come up to the front and help us start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Right up here, guys. And face the flag is over there. Okay, you ready to start? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, girls. Excellent job. We appreciate the help. Rosa, would you please call our roll?
Mayor Barnett?
Here.
Commissioner Jose?
Here.
Commissioner Wallace?
Here.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Here.
Commissioner Cullivaney?
Here.
Commissioner Gilmartin?
Here.
Commissioner Glover?
Here.
We are all here tonight. A special thank you to the Brownie Troop for coming this evening. I hope you guys learned a little something and got a chance to see your village hall. It's always fun when our residents, whether they be students or adults, come to our meetings and try and engage their government a little more. Sometimes that goes really well and sometimes not so well, but it's always better when our citizens are informed. And hopefully you guys learned something from this and you can take it back and it'll help you guys at school and help you be better brownies. Thanks again for coming. Is there a motion concerning minutes of previous council meetings?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the March 8, 2022 minutes as presented.
Second.
Any comments or questions from the council? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Item 4 on our agenda tonight is the public comments portion of our meeting. Please remember, public comments portion of these meetings, both on agenda items and on non-agenda items, is an opportunity for the public to address their council. We try to be accommodating, but it is not an open question and answer session. While we have a variety of opportunities to ask questions or engage council members, our e-remarks system, our CRC system, Coffee with the Council, which was last Saturday, direct email or by phone, I'm also certain that everyone up here spends time on a regular basis with residents on their own. The public comments agenda item and the public comments portion of each specific agenda item are intentional parts of a structured meeting. As such, we have a few expectations on how they'll be handled. Please state your name for the record. Please keep comments to 5 minutes or less. Please avoid repeating what others have already said. Please keep your comments to one visit to the podium per subject. And if you forgot to mention something or additional conversation brings up another idea, hold that idea until after the meeting or use one of the other contact methods, email, CRC, phone, etc., to let us know or bring it to the next meeting. So with that, are there any comments on subjects not on tonight's agenda?
Too many commercial breaks. Actually, I'm glad you came tonight because we're actually about to go to press. We're guaranteed 5 issues a year on Downers Grove Celebrating News. We are going to be working with the Irish American News. I just asked your photographer to make sure I get a copy of the pictures. Awesome picture, girls. Okay? And I guarantee it will be an Irish American newspaper. I have my meeting with my publisher on the 18th. Okay? I was a Boy Scout. I sold Scoutorama tickets. And I learned a lot. And I sold a lot of Scoutorama tickets. 700 when I was a Cub Scout, and 11,000 when I was a Boy Scout. It's nice to see some young ladies. Very proud. Basically it's a heart. Camping's fantastic. Hope you guys have a lot of fun. Good night.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Any others?
David Rose. I want to call attention to several anniversaries. One, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the publishing of the landmark book Limits to Growth. Two, within the last couple of weeks, the IPCC issued its 6th report on the climate situation. As with the previous 5 reports, each has been more alarming in its analysis and forecast than the last. The rate of CO2 emissions by humans is not falling, it's actually rising. In other words, each report has been essentially ignored. Only the climate scientists are freaking out. Americans are freaking out about the rising price of gasoline and other essentials like food. Guess what? The business as usual scenario of limits to growth predicted right around now would be when the limits to growth start to bite hard. When the taxing bodies of places like Downers Grove fail to take the goal of environmental sustainability seriously, what else would you expect? The mayor in waiting, of course, continues to use the word sustainability inappropriately, as he did during council's last discussion on the new facility it's trying to build. Commissioner Gilmartin's defense of his vote on the ordinance change showed similar level of ignorance on the issue. Such ignorance, of course, is emblematic of council's ongoing commitment to growth as something that has no limit, crocodile tears for trees, lost trees notwithstanding. Of course, council can excuse its failure to take the goal seriously by resorting to its time-honored pattern of following behind the lead of others. Is anyone actually leading? The fighting in Ukraine testifies to the refusal of the rich capitalist nations to take the goal of environmental sustainability seriously. Rich nations' leaders see Russia as the last great resource cornucopia, the Asian Canada, if you will, the place whose resources must be exploited by the rich nations so that their citizens can keep living high on the hog for as long as possible, as long as those resources last. Of course, American media of the conflict dutifully describes it, coverage of the conflict dutifully describes it as the U.S. government frames it, a battle of democracy versus autocracy, as if democracy in the U.S. was an example to the world instead of something in shambles. That framing is more palatable than the more accurate one, namely the conflict grows out of the U.S. effort to extend its imperialist reach and promote democracy only when it's consistent with that objective. Imperialism is a word all but barred from American media when it comes to talking about U.S. foreign policy. However, as observers such as Stephen Cohen, Chris Hodges, and John Mearsheimer have argued, given the U.S. refusal to stop poking the Russian bear via NATO expansion, Ukraine was as predictable as a conflict can be. Specifically, for the last 30 years, Americans, including our current president, have refused to ask a fundamental question. Why do we need a military alliance called NATO? Have we forgotten how freaked out American leaders were by Soviet missiles in Cuba that we cannot understand a similar reaction on the part of Russia in Eastern Europe? Apparently so. What would media coverage in the fighting of Ukraine look like if the U.S. were still militarily engaged in Afghanistan? Is the difference between the two incursions that our military kills people for their own good, using only humanitarian organs, and then we leave the survivors to their own character-building devices to pick up the pieces after we leave? Because Ukraine and Russia are major exporters of wheat, if the conflict persists, the world risks a major food crisis. Russia is also a major exporter of nitrogen, so if the trade sanctions persist, the world risks an even bigger food crisis. Why is democracy in shambles in the United States? It's a natural consequence of hitting limits to growth, particularly in a country as dedicated to inequality as the U.S. is. Will democracy be strengthened in the midst of a global food crisis and major economic collapse? The U.S. refusal to negotiate about NATO suggests a desire to find out. 3, finally, last week marked the 2-year anniversary of the official start of the COVID pandemic. Thanks presumably to RFK Jr.'s devastating takedown of Anthony Fauci's conduct in fighting both the AIDS crisis and the pandemic, Fauci has suddenly disappeared from our TV screens. The issue vis-a-vis COVID, a dubious reliance on jabbing the population rather than investigating early treatment protocols to keep cases out of hospitals and ICUs, and B, doing everything possible to improve the general health of the population. As I pointed out to council early on, if you were the virus, the U.S. was a great place to go because the well-off part of the population has been more than willing to allow the other part, up to around 60% now, to live hand to mouth, month to month, and then blame them for their health problems. Official support for jamming persists in spite of well-deserved skepticism of the credibility of both Big Pharma and Big Government on the matter. What are people to do when they feel they are being lied to at every turn by government and corporations, consistently acting to enrich the elite few, regardless of the consequences on everyone else?
Wrap it up, David. That's 5.
We're a functioning democracy. You throw the rascals out in both the public and private sectors. Does the U.S. have a functioning democracy? Are we ready to recognize there are limits to growth? Not yet, if boundary growth is any indication.
Any others, subjects not on tonight's agenda? Okay, we will continue then. We'll continue with our consent agenda. Is there a motion concerning the consent agenda?
Mayor, I move that the council adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Just like that, we are on item 7 on our agenda tonight. This is the active agenda portion of our meeting. The active agenda portion of our meeting is where we take up subjects on which we expect to take some action tonight. These would have been discussed at least once before, sometimes many times before. With that, is there a motion concerning speed reduction measures?
Mayor, I move that the council direct staff to install permanent chicanes on Forest Avenue between Franklin and Prairie Avenue.
Second.
Are there any comments or questions from the audience on this motion?
We have done this a couple times before, haven't we? I thought we were going to have a couple extra answers here. We've been working together. I think we're one frustrated conversation away from being on the same page. We all want the same thing. We've got a speeding problem on our block, and there's accidents that have happened and everything, and these guys have been good enough to fix the accident portion, but now we're worried about the speed and the volume issue. I didn't actually see from what I saw last time we talked about coming to any final agreement on something. We've always been talking about incremental and temporary. And the only thing that I saw that staff was directed to do was come up with long-term life cycle costs for yellow lines down the center of our street and chicanes. Now, there's many ways to fix this thing, but just I want to back up here. I'm still in favor of the right turn only to try it out and tweak the light, and we've all talked about this. I've sent emails. I don't want to waste my 5 minutes talking about that. But to understand where that traffic is coming from, it's coming from the 4 sources I was talking about: Gilbert Warren, Avery Coonley as it comes into Carpenter Street, and then off of 55th and Carpenter Street. Once they get up to our intersection of Forest and Franklin, they are forced to make a decision to go down our street in 3 seconds or to take a right and go down Franklin and sit at a stoplight for 2.5 minutes. They're going to take the path of least resistance, just like a little babbling brook with those 4 arteries feeding into the one river. By the time it reaches that intersection, they're forced to go down our street. We can do whatever traffic calming measures you want to do. And if you look at a traffic engineering book, there's several dozen actually, but some of the more popular ones to combat speed is a dead end. We know that doesn't work in our situation. Barricade dividers, medians or islands, pinch points or bump outs, chicanes, lane shifts, on-street parking, reducing the number of lanes or reducing the actual lane size, yellow center lines, a parking spot, parking lanes, speed bumps or speed humps. There is no one, there's a whole book on this stuff. So there's not one thing that fixes everything. And I'm telling you, you don't want to hear it again, but our street is very unique in the type of volume that we have, the aggressive 900 plus cut through traffic. And Bob, I gave you the definition and talked about it a little bit today. We don't need to go through that again. But I'm saying we are different. And I'd like to reserve the right turn only and tweaking of the light at a later time if this does not work. It's done all the time. We've had the conversation about how there's no reason we can't not let those 900 cars on our street, but we're not here to talk about that right now. So just to do my due diligence, Rich sent me down to where he lives on the Concord just to get an idea of what the chicanes look like. Because keep in mind, we have never done an exact study on our street. There was not a traffic professional on staff when this ordinance was written up. We are taking a study that was done on Highland to put chicanes on both sides of the street, and we're saying, well, it's good enough for them, it's good enough for this street. The 2 streets are not even remotely the same. I looked at Carpenter Street. Again, that's one side, there's a church on one side, a parking lot on the other. I said, well, let's go ahead and mimic this then. At one time, we're going to say, let's do parking on both sides of the street and mimic a chicane. So for the last 2 weeks, and Doug even took a couple videos of me, I have dropped my son off at Downers North, looped around, had my coffee, sent you guys texts and emails from there, and I was mimicking what a chicane or what a bump out would be like, parking either directly across from another car or like a chicane would be, and every single time these guys are flying down the middle of the road. So I'm saying that is not going to work. I'm not saying it doesn't work in other places, because obviously it does, because it's in the book. But I'm saying the only thing that I could come up with was a speed hump, because you can't drive around those things. You can drive around, if we put bump outs on each side of the street, you can drive around that. You can drive down the center of a lane and get around the chicanes. You can't get around a speed hump. Now, why are we so averse to doing that? Because we think the fire trucks or the ambulances that might go on our street one time per week won't be able to do it. So I put a call into the Hinsdale Fire Department and the Downers Fire Department. Too late in the day, they didn't get back to me. But I'm willing to bet tomorrow they're going to get back to me and saying, you know what, 25 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour with a truck that big, that massive, it's not even going to do anything. And then the snow plowing. We have humps already on Claremont. And we did that 5 or 6 years ago with this staff in place. So it is done. Now, I understand you don't want to do it on our street because you might have to rubber stamp it to do it on other streets, but that's not the case, because I think we can make a case that our street is so unique, you're not going to be able to use that for every single one. So I'm asking you guys to go back and listen to what the residents have said from day one. It is not a cosmetic thing. It is it going to work or not? I spoke to one of you today, and I'm not going to call you out because it was a private conversation, but I said if you're going to spend 25 grand to put these chicanes in, and they don't work, and it turns into a racing slalom course, will you spend the 25 grand or more to take them out and pave it over? And they said yes. So I'm saying if we're going to do that and potentially spend 50 grand, why wouldn't we want to do something temporary? Because we've always been doing temporary things. And how we're all of a sudden going to a permanent thing that was done literally because something's being done on Highland Street, it just absolutely blows my mind. The residents are totally against this. TAP unanimously is against this. Yet somehow we're here with literally a choice.
Hey, Tom.
Okay, and then the other thing is the 20-mile-an-hour thing. I don't know if this is the time to bring it up, but I did talk to almost every single business owner south of me today, and I don't think it's a surprise. Every single person was unanimously wanting that to be lowered. We're not worried about the southbound traffic, so we don't have to worry about clocking people going south. We're worried about the people coming north. And by lowering that down to 20, you will be able to clock people. I don't want the police to clock people. They've got bigger fish to fry. But if you're talking about potentially lowering us down, or raising us to 25 so you can clock people, lower them down to 20, you can have that same thing. Nobody cares if you lower it down to 20. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks. Others on this subject?
I'm Sharon Siciliano. I live at 4808 Forest. I just want to go on record about my opposition to the chicanes and yellow lines. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angie Winslow, 4800 block of Forest. We obviously, everyone on our block has really strong opinions about what we want and what we feel is best for our block. You guys have your opinions, and it's been very clear from day one that some of you are not. You flat out said, "This is the way I feel, and I will not change."
Angie, look like.
Sorry. So. I don't have anything prepared tonight, but basically I agree with Sharon. I mean, we've tried to share our opinions, and I know some of us have gotten irritating to you at times. We love Tom, but, he's Tom. And, if you get irritated with him, don't stop loving him. I mean, he's still our neighbor, and, we're trying to do what's best. So, and I'm with Sharon, we don't want the yellow lines. We don't want the chicanes. And I mean, I learned what a chicane was when I lived in Sebring, Florida for a couple of years, and chicanes are on road course racetracks. That's why I knew what it was, because there's a road course racetrack in Sebring, Florida, and they have chicanes on that, on the road course race course. I don't want my block to be a race course. It is now, and I don't think what you're about to approve is going to be a fix. So, like Sharon, I just want to go on the record for, you know, if this comes down, if this is a topic again in a month, 6 months, a year, I don't want to come back again and have a village council member or at that point maybe mayor say, well, this is the first time I've heard of that, like happened to us the first time we came in here. So thank you very much for your time during all of this, and I'd like to say thanks for listening. For those of you who do listen, thank you.
Thank you.
Again, hi, Vito Siciliano, 4808 Forest Avenue. Yes, I'm against the chicanes and definitely those yellow lines. Another thing Tom brought up and he wanted me to mention, and I don't mind mentioning because yes, I agree with that, about before you do anything, how about waiting? Because we're talking about Main Street, right, from Ogden all the way to Franklin, going down to one lane, right? How about waiting to find out what happens to us and the rest of the side streets when we start to give that an okay? Instead of doing something with our block, why don't we wait and see what happens? Is that a good idea? I think so. And please, again, we don't want those yellow lines. That to me welcomes traffic. I don't care what you put up. And I just got a question also on chicanes. Maybe you guys talked about it. We've been gone. Unfortunately, we were gone for a month, and we were very fortunate we could do it. So I wasn't there for, whatever, one meeting maybe, two. But the plowing and the trash pickup, recycling, does that affect anything with those installed? I mean, you guys can talk later about it and let us know. I'd appreciate it. I don't know if anything has been done about that from TAP department, but that would be something I think we should look at also. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Debbie Scarlatti, 4011 Forest. I just want to go on record also that we're not for the chicanes or the yellow lines. And something to think about, I've thought about with the chicanes, we do have a short block, and that is going to decrease, I believe, the amount of parking places we will have on our block. Will it? And I mean, that's something to consider, please. I mean, I'm a family of 6. We have a lot of family. And deleting a parking place between the Sicilianos and the Scarlattis on any given weekend it might not be a concern to anybody else, but it will definitely be a concern to my block of forest. I don't know. I know we've taken up a lot of time. I don't know that we have really looked at all the options before we got to whatever was proposed tonight. I think I'm a little caught off guard by that I wasn't aware that we were coming to such a quick decision, and I'm sorry for that. But thank you.
Thank you. Okay. We'll move over to the council now. Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. There's a difference between hearing somebody and agreeing with them. We're listening to everything. We may not always agree with what you have to say, but we're listening. And if you paid close attention to the motion I made, it did not include striping, and that was intentional. The issue with that is that I'm not sure that we're all on board with the effectiveness of chicanes absent striping. So I'd like to ask staff if they have any information on the effectiveness of chicanes without striping.
Any thoughts, Dave?
Thank you, Mayor. Staff would like the opportunity to review the concept that's expressed in the motion, which is chicanes without center line striping, and provide an analysis with recommendations at the next Village Council meeting.
Thank you, Dave. So I don't necessarily want to stop any of my colleagues from saying anything, but I'll have a motion to make once the conversation's done.
Anything else for the moment?
No, Mayor, thank you.
Others? Leslie?
Yeah, I'm glad that we are going to be taking a look at chicanes without striping. That was another question that I had, so I appreciate you bringing that up. I do also just want to go on record and state that because I am not aware of any chicanes proper in the village. I know we have a lot of bump outs and curb bump outs, for those who aren't aware, are also used for pedestrian safety and kind of some other purposes. I would like to see the chicanes be temporary and give that some time, maybe a 6-month period, to see if it is effective in reducing speeds, because as we talked about the last time around, if we reduce speeds, then hopefully it will indirectly reduce volume, because it will not be as appealing of an issue, in addition to taking a look at some of those timing structures. But I do appreciate you asking that question, and I'm in favor of getting more information. Thanks.
Thank you. What else? Danny?
Yeah. So I support this motion for a number of reasons. I think first and foremost, a number of months ago, we discussed and heard from residents and subsequent studies that safety was the #1 issue. And with that in mind, with speed and safety being the #1 issue, and the fact that we want to take incremental steps, I do think that chicanes are the next incremental step. And I can understand why we want to do temporary, because that's what we've been doing, but I just don't know if those will have the same effect as the actual permanent chicanes will. As far as other options of street narrowing that were presented, I've been doing my own research. I'm on that street every day. I've been taking photos, trying to see if people are parking there, and very rarely do I see cars parked there. So I don't think that that's a dependable obstacle to reduce these speeders. I would like to consider the aesthetics of the neighborhood, so I do appreciate the fact that we're considering removing the center lines. Interested to see what staff has to say about that. I'm also still in favor of the 20 miles per hour. As Tom discussed, he visited some of those neighboring businesses. I don't see any reason why we can't extend that, and think it's just as enforceable as if it were 25. And yeah, so I'm in favor of moving forward with the chicanes. I think this is the most repeatable fix that we can do, and we can do it in other places in the community when the same issue arises. So I'm interested to see how they can make the aesthetics look. So that's it.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, I see this a little bit differently than my colleagues, and I'm at the point where I would really like to see other options. There was a discussion over the weekend amongst various commissioners about perhaps the idea of narrowing the street in the middle of the street, and then even speed humps came back on the table. I spoke about speed humps before. I couldn't get any traction on that issue, so I thought it was dead, and I thought the residents didn't want that. You know, we do have to make tough decisions here, and we are the policymakers, and that's why we're elected, and that's why we have to do this. But we also have to take resident input into effect, and I thought that the idea of looking at other options was a reasonable request, things like speed humps. So what I would prefer to see is that we direct staff to come up with a couple, perhaps 3 different designs that would solve the problem of excess speed. I was looking at the speed numbers. It is pretty extreme. On one given day, there were 19 cars that were going double the speed limit, 40 at a minimum. There were a couple of cars going 55, 60 to 64. There were 2 cars that were going 70 to 74 miles an hour on a given day. So it is a really serious problem, and with the right kind of traffic calming measures, I don't think somebody would be willing to put their car at risk to try to go over a reasonable speed hump at 65 miles an hour. And it is a residential street. So that's my opinion about this. Instead of us raising the speed limit to 25, I think it's a reasonable alternative to lower the speed limit per the TAP recommendation to 20 miles per hour on Forest from Franklin to Warren, and that would allow us to start enforcing the traffic. It's also important for the residents to know that we do not have the kind of police coverage in this town that would prevent speeding on all the locations where we have speeding, and we do have a serious problem with that. However, this is the one that's got the spotlight on it, and I would much prefer us to do that. And as far as parking on both sides, I don't think that's a viable option. I also drove down the street one day, there was only 1 car there, and then I envisioned 2 cars trying to pass if there were cars on both sides of the street, and that's a dangerous situation. With that much traffic volume, we can't put our residents and nearby neighbors in a position where they have to pull over to the side and stop to let the traffic go the other way. So I'm not in favor of that. But I would really like to see some other options here. I don't think it's an unreasonable request or a huge amount of staff time to come back with a schematic of speed humps, chicanes, mid-street bump outs. I guess if I were the engineer on this, I could envision a scenario where there are bump outs at the entrance to the block and at the end of the block. So on both sides, that narrow that down, and then something in the middle of the block, so people couldn't get up to that rate of speed. So, and I'm hoping my colleagues are open to that kind of input. Temporary chicanes are really, really ugly. So, I think that's, if we choose that, that's something we're just going to have to expect and live with. Permanent chicanes are pretty expensive. Portable speed humps, I think, go in pretty cheaply. I've lived in Downers Grove for many years, and the neighborhood, I used to live in the neighborhood where I had to use Claremont to get out, so I was familiar with probably a good 10, 15, maybe even a 20-year fight with those residents on how to solve the same problem. And there were various different things, temporary speed bumps, temporary speed humps, bump outs, and now there are some permanent speed humps there, which I drive over several times per week at the speed limit, because to do it much faster than that is not good for the suspension of the car. So that's my input on that.
Any other comment? Not right now. Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not going to repeat. I agree with a lot of what has been said. I also think taking a look if we need to understand removing the double yellow and what that impact to the chicane effectiveness will be. I support that. I was not a fan of the double striping, so I would love to hear without it if that's still a viable solution. I do think the chicanes still remain a viable solution, but in sort of my study around it, which I do not claim to be any sort of traffic expert, but just there seems to be a lot that needs to go into the design, the placement, into those to really have a lot of impact, or will have an impact on their effectiveness. So I'm interested to understand, I think, more detail about that in order to determine whether or not I think it is the right solution. But, from what I've tried to study as best I can, the one thing that stood out to me about chicanes from a positive standpoint was that they also tended to have an impact on lowering volume. And I know that's not been the task that we've asked staff or that we've put forth, but it seems to have that type of impact, which I have to believe is why staff is thinking about it. So I don't want to speak for staff, but that's sort of my take on that. I also do support lowering the speed limit on the lower legs of Forest and south of there down to 20 rather than going up to 25 on the 4800 block. But certainly would love to hear back from staff on if we remove the double yellow, include the chicanes. But additionally, I think because we have a unique situation with this street, I think we've talked for months about how unique it is. It's going to require, I think we've said, some unique solutions. And I get a little concerned about waiting because we have lots of speed and lots of traffic. And while I absolutely appreciate all of the information and the residents' input here because it has had an impact, I want to make sure we're doing our job in solving that solution. And many months ago, there was a lot of concern about what's going to happen. And I don't want to walk away from this and look back 6 months from now and see that there was an accident or a speeding car because we did nothing. We were waiting to wait for another street to have that solution. So again, I welcome and will continue to welcome the input and the feedback, and I understand what change can mean. But I think in this instance, I think we would absolutely want to make sure that we do something to fix these speeds as I've said all along, to lower the volume. And with all the options that are available, this chicane option does seem like a reasonable and also effective solution. So I just want to see it flushed out as best we can so that we can make a decision that does have an impact on the street, because as we've heard many, many times, it's been 20 years without a lot of effort towards it. And I'm not willing to let another year go by without putting some sort of fix into this to have an improvement in both speeds and volume and ultimately adding to safety. So I think I know where we may be going in pausing for a couple of weeks, and I'm behind that. But I just wanted to make sure my thoughts were on record. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. What else? Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor. We've talked about a lot up here tonight, so I want to try and stick to simply the motion that is before us, which I could not second because if it were to come to a vote, I would not be able to vote for it at this time. I think there's been so much surrounding this issue that I will speak for myself. I've personally been overwhelmed with the amount of information from staff, from residents, and I appreciate it all. But it is still this balancing act of listening to residents, thinking about everyone in the community, listening to what staff is saying, what TAP is saying. There's so many factors that play into all of this. And I appreciate Commissioner Jose bringing up the potential to allow staff to investigate chicanes without striping. I voted to put up the block of Forest to close off that street right away after that first accident occurred. It was a very emotional decision, and I think looking back on that, I would have preferred to do something more incremental because I think that whole thing went sideways on us, and I am partially to blame for that, I feel. So when I think about doing it incrementally, I don't think about jumping straight to permanent centerline striping or permanent chicanes. I'm not willing to pay $25,000 worth of taxpayer dollars to remove the chicanes if they did not work, which would then be a total of $50,000 of taxpayer money. I don't know that we are necessarily, that we know that the chicanes will work. I don't know that I personally have a comfort level with feeling that those will be successful once they're put in, and would hate to spend that money to then take them out. I would have preferred, a temporary chicane, though I understand that perhaps those may not have the same effect. But as the motion read tonight, there was no way that I could support it given all of those different factors. So I appreciate Commissioner Jose bringing up staff going back and at least investigating the striping and at least making sure if this were to come back to a vote, depending on what shakes out here in a few minutes, that we all feel comfortable and prepared and have all of the information before us that we may need.
Rich?
Yeah, I'd like to make some other editorial comments here. First of all, it's important for the residents to understand that everyone sitting at this dais is very serious about this and wants to solve the problems. We come at it with different opinions, and that doesn't mean we don't care about the issue or that we're, spurious or negligent people or that we have ill intent for any of our residents. One of the challenges this body is struggling with is how do we solve these in other areas, and even though we can allow for differentiation based on the various streets, we pretty much have to come up with something that, okay, this is going to be the Downers Grove solution. And as we roll these out, we are responding to this street and spending so much attention because a very serious issue with crashes was brought to our attention in a very visual way, in a very emotional way. So we responded to that. We did put the effort in, and we have pretty much solved that issue, not having a single accident that's come to our attention since then. We would like to put the same attention and also have the same level of satisfaction with the result. But because we're trying to figure out some kind of a template and things that we can pull out of our toolkit in other places around town that we can reasonably say, well, we've done this before. And certain residents have said, well, we're not going to use this as an example, but then, in the next breath they bring up Webster as an example. Well, if you did it for Webster, why aren't you doing it for us? Totally different scenario. So I really like to have us figure out some other options. I'd love to see some of these staffs come back with a couple of different ideas. I'm not thinking about waiting months for this. Weeks is probably right. We've been notified of a problem, and it's our responsibility to solve that problem one way or another. So that's all I got on this. Thank you, Mayor.
I'll take a couple minutes here. We got here because we were trying to solve a problem. And we solved one, or I think we mostly solved one, and in doing so, we identified another. And what you've just heard is 7 people who are probably all have a slightly different version of what that solution might look like. And then what we heard certainly from residents in that neighborhood was several more versions of what that solution looks like. The good news is everybody in the room here is interested in trying to find a way to make Forest Avenue safer in that block between Franklin and Prairie. I appreciate the aesthetic concerns, I guess is the way I'm going to put it. I have said through most of this conversation, and I still say today, that what I'm hopeful for is something we can turn into a bit of a template. Because I know people that live on Forest are rightly, thrilled with where they live and see it as unique, and it is. But I think probably everybody that lives on their block in town would say that because we really like our neighbors. We love Tom Butt. The truth is we like where we live, all of us, and we don't want speeding cars. We don't want lots of accidents, and so we're trying to figure out a way to fix that. Because of that, when I hear this group up here talking tonight, I hear various concerns about things that are technical and also various concerns about things that are aesthetic. I heard certainly from via email and certainly from the podium tonight folks who had some very specific aesthetic concerns. So Greg's comment and Dave's reaction to try and get a little more time on understanding the yellow lines is totally appropriate. That's a very technical issue. I guess I would also be curious to see, if we were looking at this and we were trying to figure out how to blend aesthetics and the engineering, what that might look like. I'm very interested in pursuing a physical change to Forest Avenue and that block to control speeding. Very interested in that. There are different ways to do that. Commissioner Colavani mentioned speed bumps. That's one way of doing it. We've obviously seen chicanes. There's other places in town we've done different things. But a physical change to that block, which could mean you don't like the parking situation. It could mean that there's a different aesthetic. But I think that pursuing that is worth it. We have a problem there that we'd all like to try and fix. So if staff needs a little more time, I would certainly welcome that, but I agree with others up here who have said we now know we have a problem, and we should be trying to pursue a fix to it, not just a wait and see down the road kind of thing. So I'm very much in favor of pursuing and continuing to actually make some progress, if that means waiting a couple of weeks till we get a little more details on some of the comments that have been made up here. I'm fine with that, but I do not want to just punt this into the future. I think we got a problem we need to try and solve. Greg, Chris, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Greg.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. So I just want to make sure I'm clear. It sounds like we're asking to evaluate the chicanes without the double yellow. I guess I'm curious about my fellow commissioners here. Are we also asking for alternatives to chicanes as well?
Let me start the answer by answering
Yep.
that question. I think that's a good question that we should, for the benefit
for clarity,
frankly,
yeah.
of staff, we should answer, because otherwise you're going to end up with, again, missed expectations, I think. Chicane is turning into a word, right? But we talk about chicanes, and certainly there are some in Sebring. There are also some in LaGrange. They are designed to move traffic off a center line, make them change a center line. And then there's narrowing, which also people have spoken about. I personally am interested in pursuing those kinds of changes, meaning where we think we're going to move people off a center line and narrow the road. That, from the work that I've read, that is the way chicanes are successful. Now, they come in all forms and shapes and sizes, from orange temporary cones to curbs to concrete K-rails to all kinds of things. But that premise of narrowing streets and moving people off of a center line is the part that I'm interested in seeing alternative versions of. So we probably should all answer that, because the way this is sounding tonight is staff's going to leave here being asked to do something, and they need to know why. Want to pursue that? Danny, got any additional thoughts on that?
I also shared the same thought as Rich about narrowing towards the center, but I just didn't want to bring up a completely new option. But I for one, stop or at least slow down when I see one of those pedestrian signs in the middle of the road, and when it gets narrow, it makes me weary that somebody's gonna run out in front of me. So that seemed like a reasonable solution to me if we were gonna be thinking about other ways of narrowing. But that's the only thought I had on that.
Others want to weigh in? Leslie?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in it. I think for me, it depends on how the research on chicanes without striping goes. So if we kind of do a little bit of digging and we see that it is still potentially effective, then I think we should move forward with what staff's recommendation was originally. But if we don't have a lot of data on that, I would be open to hearing more about median ways to reduce the width via the median.
Anyone else? Rich?
Well, it seems like almost everyone in the room is against yellow lines, so I think that goes without saying, except staff has to figure out if it works or not. I'm not 100% clear on what happens if staff comes back and says chicanes just won't work without double lines. The people are taking a curvilinear path and they need to know where their car belongs, and we can't just rely on cars mixing it up. So I'm kind of questioning staff, what happens if that comes back as a negative?
Yeah.
Well, we'd have a decision to make, but we don't know that. We want to get that sort of formally determined.
So, and then my second question, are my colleagues opposed to, first of all, I'd like to get village commissioners and the mayor out of the specific design business here and throw it back to the professionals who do that for a living. And, but I'm wondering if my fellow commissioners are open to staff coming back with other solutions that would solve the problem in a different way, or at least give us perhaps 3 different choices.
Mayor?
Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. On page 2 of the staff report, there's 4 bullet points of staff recommendations. It includes changing the speed limit to 25, eliminating the parking restrictions, adding a double yellow center line stripe, and then considering the chicanes. I think we've heard from the professionals, and the neighborhood doesn't like it, and some of us don't like it. So we're trying to find ways to kind of work within that. which is where the chicanes without the center line striping was born. I agree with you that, you know, if they come back and say, look, this just isn't going to work, you know, we've got ourselves a problem. It's about trying to balance the aesthetic concerns and desires of the neighborhood with the effectiveness of what it is we're trying to do, which is slow the traffic down. If there's another way to do it that for whatever reason didn't make this list, I'd be willing to look at it. But I think the staff created this list for a reason. In terms of the crosswalk with, you know, pedestrian, the signage that you described, Danny, I mean, my concern there would be that the crosswalk comes with ADA compliance issues, and we want to talk about 25,000 for chicanes. ADA compliance is going to be multiples of that. And then you've got to deal with whatever changes come to the ADA after that, because they do come periodically. So for my part, I'd rather stick with the option we've got for the time being. Let's take a look at whether this will work with the center line removed. If it doesn't, then I think we've got a tough call to make. But as Rich said, that's what we got elected for.
Okay. Chris, please.
So I had asked the question, just wanted to weigh in on the question that was asked. So I tend to agree with Commissioner Jose. I think we've got some options here that I believe have been filtered through what staff thinks is best. I'm just a little concerned about feeling like we're going back to the drawing board, but I do understand the idea if the double yellow and the chicanes are integrated and part and parcel, then yeah, we do have some decisions to make there. So certainly, I hope I'm being clear, I certainly support giving staff the opportunity to review the double yellow or taking the double yellow out. I just don't know if now is the time they should be looking for alternatives. If next time we hear, hey, chicanes, you got to have a double yellow or it's not worth putting them in, feels like then we need to, that would be a good time for us to say, okay, we do have to go back to the drawing board because we're not comfortable putting chicanes in and nothing else is as effective. So that's how I feel on that. I did have one question, and it's okay if this comes back next week. I know we talked about speed humps, and I can't remember, and maybe someone, not that I can't remember, I'm not sure, well, maybe I can't remember why that was not a particularly favored option.
We'll get the analysis out that we performed earlier and dust it off and have it ready for you next time.
I feel like it was something with spacing.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you. That would be great since that's been brought up and an option that folks seem to be warming back up to, we should understand all of that implication. So thank you, Mayor.
Greg, you've been waiting to adjust our sales. What do you got?
Mayor, I move that we postpone definitely to April 5th, 2022.
Second.
Such a motion requires a roll call. Rosa, would you please call the roll on that?
Commissioner Jose?
Aye.
Commissioner Wallace?
Aye.
Commissioner Glover?
Aye.
Commissioner Gilmartin?
Aye.
Commissioner Colavani?
Nay.
Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit?
Aye.
Mayor Barnett?
Aye, that motion passes. Procedurally, such a motion requires an immediate vote, no further discussion, just so that everybody understands what happened there. It happened once before on the subject of gaming. My colleagues probably remember that. So we'll be talking about this again sometime down the road. Thank you all. Okay. Let's go to our first reading. Our first reading is item 8 on the agenda. This is where we take up subjects to discuss on which we do not plan to take action this evening. These can be subjects that we've talked about previously and are continuing, or first discussed tonight. With that, Manager Fieldman.
Thank you, Mayor Barnett. Tonight's first reading has 2 agenda items, but it's really one topic, and it is outdoor dining. Downtown outdoor dining for 2022 and beyond is a Village Council priority action item. In February, the Council approved ordinance amendments establishing an outdoor dining program. The Village Council also directed staff to explore further amendments to allow outdoor dining in establishments located outside of the area of the downtown. The Village Council considered a proposed amendment regarding areas outside of downtown at the March 1st Village Council meeting. And based on Village Council direction at that time, staff modified the draft ordinance that is presented here before you tonight to allow tents in outdoor cafes located on private property outside the downtown, and to amend the building code to allow these tents to remain up through the entire outdoor dining season. In response to questions that came in late last week, staff has also included information about all the outdoor dining program fees, bonds, and insurance. We're happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Dave, we can just talk about A and B together, yeah?
Yes, please. B is the ordinance amending the building and fire codes that would align the timing, the 180-day time to extend it to 246.
Okay. Thoughts from the council on this subject? You want to start the dialogue? Nobody wants to start? All right, I'll start. So I largely agree with what's here. What I'm perhaps missing, and if I'm missing it, I apologize, but was there any prohibition against tents having sides on it?
No proposed limitations on sides.
So from my perspective, I like what's here, except that I would like to add that prohibition. Beyond that, I'm okay with what's been presented here and would be happy to move forward with it.
Yeah, I agree with that provision. I also agree with the extension of the dates. Is that's the next item, isn't it? I would actually like us to continue not charging the fees other than the surety bond and the insurance for one more season, just like we did in 2021 and 2020. And the reason for that is I know that our restaurants are coming back nicely, but I'm also very sensitive to the fact that when you have a year when your business is down 60 to 80%, it takes quite some time to make up for that. And not every restaurateur has really deep pockets and may not always have the resources to draw on. And it's not a huge amount of money for the village, so I think it'd be a sign of us showing our continued partnership to continue that. And if they have even more business, then we'll get more sales tax revenue and food and beverage revenue. So it's not like the village won't be getting that revenue back in a different way.
Leslie?
Yep. I am also in favor of disallowing walls. This really is meant to be a warm weather outdoor cafe kind of experience. And I understand how, coming off of the heels of the pandemic, how, there had been times when there were walls put up, but kind of where we are now, it should be more of the al fresco outdoor experience. And so I am also in favor of adding that into the ordinance. I would also support what Commissioner Colavani said of giving one more year of kind of not requiring those fees. I do know that the cost of labor, supply chain issues and labor shortages are just, with the economy rebounding, are in a very strange place, and we kind of don't know where that is. And so knowing that this is just a small portion of our revenue, I agree that we could hold off on the fees for one more year. So I could support that as well. Thank you.
Leslie, looking at Leslie. Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor. Don't want to repeat too much, but I am also in favor of requesting that it be added tents with no walls, and agree with my colleagues to waive those fees for one more year, try and let people recover from what's been going on. Mentioned labor shortage. People still have a lot going on, so I would be in favor of allowing one more year without charging those fees. Thank you, Mayor.
Greg?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm still not completely sold on the idea of the tents in the first place, but if we're going to have them, let's not have walls. When it comes to the tents, I'm still kind of processing everything. I understand and I appreciate all the feedback that we've gotten. For lack of a better way to put it, I'm really concerned that we end up not necessarily having a bunch of tents that look like a tailgate. I want it to be something that's a little more aesthetically pleasing. I'm sure you can figure out how to draft that in an ordinance, right? So, with regard to the fees, we just put the fees back into place about a month ago, and nobody said this then. I don't necessarily have a problem with waiving them, but I think we got to make sure we're waiving them village-wide, and not just,
Yes.
outside of downtown. If we're going to do it, let's do it. I'd like to know exactly what the village impact is, or the revenue impact is, because I know there are costs that come along. And just so the folks, sorry, Dave, but just so the folks at home who are watching understand, our goal in charging the fees is to essentially cover our costs. There's no profit made on this.
Right.
It's not a revenue generator for the village. But
Staff estimate from a couple months ago was about $33,000.
And that's
in
village
revenue paid in, right? That was for downtown, but there's only a couple of places we're expecting if this ordinance passes for outside of downtown, so let's call it 35.
Good. Yeah, then I'm all right with it, with the understanding that it really is a temporary thing. At some point, we want to cover those costs, or otherwise other people end up paying for it, i.e. our taxpayers. Thank you, Mayor.
Chris?
Thank you, Mayor. I too am not going to repeat. I support the concurrent time period of tents to outdoor dining. I also am not a fan of the walls, would like to see that. And I think in some ways, to Commissioner Jose's point, and I'm not sure this is something that we can legislate per se. I mean, we can, but I think it's something that I'd want to think about. But maybe not for this year, but thinking about sort of that quality of tent, and if there is a way to sort of quantify or think about how we can establish some standards. We've got all kinds of downtown standards that we put in place, and I think this could be one of them. I think this isn't the year. They're using the tents from last year, and I understand all the supply chain issues and things like that. But I do think as we look at this, because this feels like it's becoming more and more of it's going to be a permanent thing in our town, that we set some standards that don't make it turn into like a carnival looking all the time. So I don't know that that's anything we can do now, but I would be interested in keeping that in mind. In terms of the fees, I agree. I think it's something we can certainly do. I do think there's going to come a time we're going to have to turn them back on, but I do feel like even though now the restaurants appear to be packed, the December and January and November were brutal, maybe even worse than before. So I'm all for supporting that, and would support that moving forward for this year. I think that's it.
If I could, Mayor, just on the quality standards,
Yeah.
not speaking to aesthetics, but speaking to structural, safety, et cetera.
Yeah.
There are very stringent codes about the tents that are installed for these purposes.
Okay.
So they're very sturdy, they're proper fire codes and exiting, et cetera. It doesn't speak directly to aesthetics.
Sure.
But some folks are picturing the things that you might put out in your backyard,
Yeah.
for a little family gathering. That is not really
Yeah.
allowed under our code. Those types of tents wouldn't meet our existing code, which is not proposed to be changed.
Thank you for that clarification.
Danny?
Yeah. Yeah. So I obviously was very happy to see the tents get what seems to be approval. I really don't have a preference on the sides. I can agree that these are meant to be outdoor dining experiences, so I don't really have any objections to that, nor would I mind if there was sides on them. And I can absolutely support reducing the fees as Commissioner Colavini requested. And to Commissioner Jose and Gil Martin's point, I think that we would all like to see something more permanent, a more permanent solution, and maybe by waiving these fees this year, it entices them to, or allows them to allocate some of their budget next year towards a more permanent solution. So I could definitely get behind reducing the fees this year with that in mind. That's it.
Rich?
Yeah, I just want to add that I don't envision this as an every year kind of thing. I think when we have some more time, we have to decide what a permanent thing. And the one thing that popped into my mind was Maison Sabika in Naperville, and I guess for several years, they had a tent that they used for weddings and stuff, and it was very festive and had that outdoor atmosphere, and then they finally were able to build a permanent solution, so then they were able to do away with their tent. I don't know how long they had it. I don't know what the ordinances were in Naperville, but that was kind of an example of a tent venue that turned out to be very positive, but it wasn't sustainable over the long term, and now, going past their permanent thing looks really nice. So I think we should definitely make sure we're keeping that in mind as we look at this next time around.
I'm going to be the stick in the mud on the fees. Just for the record, I do not favor waiving those. And there's a host of reasons. One is I think we could probably do some analysis from our F&B tax. It'd be pretty easy to discount and look in the arrears and determine whether or not we actually have a growing or shrinking or struggling food and beverage market. I don't have my numbers in front of me from my last EDC meeting, but I don't recall them as giving the kind of indication that we thought there was any difficulty in that particular market segment. But beyond that, the money, guys, is in the bond. The money is in the bond, and I heard Rich say he wanted to retain the surety bond. So the fees we're talking about are $33,000 to the village, but they are measured in the hundreds, not thousands, and they are, to Greg's point, to cover the work that has to be done that we would otherwise have to essentially take out of general revenues. So the sentiment is, I think positive. We want to try and be helpful to our industry that's important to us. But that applies everywhere, guys. We have fees for everything, and the purpose of those fees all across the board, whether they're electrical inspections or they're putting up a tent and getting an outdoor license, is to cover the work of administrating those services. And the bond money is the real money. So if we waive these fees, people are still talking about thousands of bonds that they're going to have to submit that are going to be cashed checks. These are not insurance policies. They're cash checks. So they're going to save $300 or $400, maybe as much as $800, and still have to put down several thousands of cash. And the purpose of that going up, I just want to remind everybody, was because we've struggled with this idea of going from temporary to permanent, and how do we ensure the cleanliness and the upkeep and the downtown wear and tear gets managed. And so that was really the purpose. It's like any other bond. It's like the ones we would take on a construction project. So I'm not going to lose my mind, but I just want to make sure that we're not talking about saving people thousands and thousands of dollars so they can, in a couple of years, all of a sudden put up some kind of permanent outdoor thing. That's not what's going on here. This is less than $1,000, in some cases less than $750, and they still have to come up with thousands. So I'm okay with it. I think the context is important. We bumped that bond up because we were worried about the condition of our downtown and the way stuff was kept. So, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The bond, though, just so I'm clear, is a one-time thing, right? So that would roll over a year. They could let that roll over year over year?
Yes.
Okay, but the fees are every year, obviously.
Correct.
Okay. And to me, that changes it a little bit, just a little.
Rich?
Yeah, I agree with your comments, Mayor. I do see it more as a goodwill and supportive gesture. And the reason for the surety bond is much the same reason that people have to put a security deposit on a rental. It forces them to make sure that they're taking care of the thing. In our case, it was the cleanliness. We did get a lot of comments. I know you personally walk the street a lot in the summer and the spring, and you see those things. So I think it's not an insignificant item for the village for us to demand the maximum cleanliness of our downtown when we have so many people, particularly downtown dining. So, and if at the end of the year, if they don't need it for the next year, they get that money back, correct?
Okay. Anyone else? Discussion component here? David, I think you got pretty clear direction, right?
We have clear direction. We will have this reflected in the materials at the next council meeting for proposed action.
Okay.
And that concludes our first reading tonight, Mayor. Thank you so much.
How about a manager report?
No report tonight, Mayor.
Attorney's report.
Only a quick one, just to recap, the two ordinances that will be on the next active agenda will be an ordinance amending the outdoor dining provisions and an ordinance amending the building and fire codes for temporary structures.
Thank you. Item 11 on the agenda, council member reports. This is a portion of our meeting where council members report out on goings-on in the community and other organizations they're working with and events they want to highlight. And we'll start with Rich.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Leslie.
Mark your calendar for the Grove Foundation's Passport to Dining, which will be on Thursday, April 7th. That's it.
Nicole.
When you go to buy your Passport for Dining tickets, just a reminder, you can only pay with cash or check. You cannot pay with a credit card like my husband tried to do today. That is all, Mayor.
Bad move, Mark, bad move. Danny.
Who has cash or checks these days? No report, thank you, Mayor.
What's a
Chris.
check?
Just one thing, I just want to say congratulations to the Downers Grove North alum, Kendall Grush, on her 3 medals in the Winter Paralympic Games in China. Congratulations, outstanding.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say congratulations to everybody who was part of the the Downers Grove Fire Department's awards ceremony this past Friday. A number of us were there, Commissioner Cullivaney, Commissioner Sadowski-Fugit, Commissioner Wallace, the mayor. Hearing some of the stories, both from members of the department and from members of the public, was really moving. And I hope we have an opportunity to highlight some of them here in council chambers in the not too distant future, because they will make you feel really good about the public servants that we have and some of the great residents that we have doing everything they can for their fellow people. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Greg. Just to expand a little bit on, add a couple sentences to Greg's comments about Friday night. It's a lot of fun to watch that event and to be part of it and to see our team members who are first coming to join us or getting promoted within the organization. It's really fun to see their families with them and know that that's what's really behind it. But these stories Greg's talking about, he undersold them a little bit. We're talking about people doing extraordinary things for other people to save lives. Firefighters that are doing work when they're off duty in other communities, residents or even visitors to our community who are saving lives within our community before others can even show up. They are awesome stories, and so I join Greg in hoping that maybe there's a way sometime down the road we can find a way to just make those a little more broadly known, because they are inspiring. They will likely inspire everyone who hears them to find some way to be helpful to somebody else, which is cool. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you all, and good night.